The night smelled like burnt coffee, wet pavement, and last chances. In the corner booth of a half-empty diner, Ava Mercer sat beneath a flickering light, her fingers pressed over a court order that had already begun to bury her alive. Across the room, in the shadows, Vincent Kane watched without moving. Broad shoulders still, eyes unreadable, a man carved out of old money, cold choices, and dangerous silence. When he finally crossed the room, it felt less like an introduction and more like fate arriving 5 minutes before midnight. She looked up with tear-swollen eyes. He looked down like he had just found the one thing in the city that could still make him feel human. And when he said with impossible calm that he could give her a husband, a home, and a future before the clock ran out, the story stopped being about rescue. It became a reckoning, because some offers save lives and others change them beyond repair.
The countdown begins. 12 hours. That is all the time Ava Mercer has left before the cold machinery of the law rips her child away forever. She sits there, a woman drowning in debt, crushed by a heartless demand. Find a husband and a home by noon tomorrow, or lose 6-year-old Eli to the state. Midnight finds her alone in a desolate diner, her spirit finally snapping under the weight of it all. She is a broken soul, unaware that a predator is watching from the shadows, a man whose mind works like a cold machine. What he offers next will either be her salvation or the final blow that shatters her world. Watch as a mother's love hits its breaking point. Stay tuned as the tragedy unfolds. The scene, Rosie's diner. The air is thick with the buzz of dying fluorescent lights and the smell of old grease. It is 15 past midnight, and the world outside is dead. Tucked into a back booth, Ava's sanity is unraveling, strand by strand, as she watches her entire life dissolve into nothingness. She hunches over, shoulders tight, trying to swallow the sobs that threaten to choke her. Scattered across the table, the legal papers look like jagged shards of glass, the blueprints of her ruin. The state's decree is clear. Find a stable home and a father figure for the boy by midday, or it is over. March 15th. The date is a noose tightening around her neck. A waitress, Gloria, leans in to offer a refill of coffee, but Ava just shakes her head. She cannot even afford $2 for a cup of comfort. Her poverty is a prison, and there is no way out. She cannot bear to go back to that crumbling apartment where Eli sleeps under the watchful eye of a neighbor. She is a woman on the run from her own past. 6 months ago, she fled a man named Marcus Chen, a cruel twist of fate, given the name she once hoped would mean safety. Their 3 years together were a slow-motion car crash of bruises and betrayal. She hid the pain behind thick makeup and long sleeves until the day he turned his rage toward the boy. That was the end. She ran with $17 in her pocket, driven by a primal need to save her son. It is a David and Goliath story, but Goliath is winning. Marcus uses his family's millions to pull the strings of the justice system like a puppet master. Ava is a ghost of a woman, drained by back-to-back shifts and trying to fight a legal war without a single soldier in her corner. At first, she had a glimmer of hope. The court gave her custody and kept Marcus at a distance, but he took it as a personal insult. 2 weeks ago, he launched a fresh assault, painting her as a broken, dangerous woman to steal the boy back for good. His lawyers are poets of destruction, twisting her misfortunes into weapons. They took footage of her broken-down car and a single tearful moment in a supermarket aisle and served them up as proof of a fractured mind. It was psychological warfare at its most refined. She is being erased by a system that claims to help. The court evaluator smiles with pity, but judges her by the numbers. To them, her cheap apartment is a hazard, and the 70 hours she works to keep Eli fed are seen as neglect. She begs them to understand the bond of a mother, but her words fall on deaf ears. The court prefers the hollow stability Marcus offers, a big house in the suburbs and a shiny new stepmother named Jennifer. Raw love means nothing to a judge. Finding out Marcus had already replaced her was a knife to the heart. The judge's so-called mercy was a death sentence in disguise, 30 days, to build a middle-class life out of thin air and empty pockets. She spent weeks chasing ghosts, applying for aid that never came. In a moment of pure madness, she even scrolled through dating apps, hoping to find a stranger to play the part of a husband. Then Marcus tightened the screws, cutting her time down to 12 measly hours. Panic is a cold sweat. She pleaded with a landlord who has a heart of stone and begged social workers who are buried in paperwork. Every door she knocked on slammed in her face. There is no one left to call. She tried to reach her own mother, a woman she had not spoken to in years, only to find the line was dead. The silence was absolute. Now she huddles in this diner, staring into the abyss of a life without her son. Her pride is a tattered flag. She dabs at her eyes with a cheap paper napkin, convinced she is invisible in her grief. She is wrong. From the shadows of a dark booth, a predator is watching, a man who belongs to a world of power she cannot even imagine. Enter Vincent Caney, a ghost in a bespoke suit. He is the man of infinite wealth and zero mercy, hiding out after a bloody fallout with the Russian mob. His presence in this greasy spoon is a cosmic accident, a collision of two vastly different tragedies. Vincent is a man dodging shadows, his empire under fire from Volkov's assassins. He has the power to crush them, but the constant hunt has left him hollow and exhausted. For the first time in his life, the silence of his fortress feels like a cage. At 42, the walls are closing in. He has built a kingdom of secrets and lies, mastering a game where the only prize is staying alive one more day. Now he looks at his hands and sees nothing but dust. He was a man who lived without anchors, viewing love as a weakness and people as chess pieces. He has no one to follow him, no heart to call his own. The void inside him is the price of his perfection. He was ready to vanish back into his fortress when her sobbing stopped him. Usually he is deaf to the cries of the world, but there was a specific, haunting note in her despair that cut through his armor like a diamond. He watches her from the darkness, his eyes scanning her like a high-resolution camera. He sees the legal papers and the shaking hands, dismantling the puzzle of her life piece by piece. He is not a man who helps. He is a man who solves. His internal report: a woman in her 30s, worn down by labor and lack of sleep. A waitress named Ava. She has nothing of value left. Even her watch is a cheap, broken relic. She is a portrait of total collapse. Every instinct told him to walk away. He deals in billions and blood, not the small-town sorrows of a waitress. But for some reason he remains seated, captivated by the raw wreckage of her soul. "I tried, Eli," she breathes into the empty air, the sound of a woman surrendering to the dark. That name, that pure maternal agony finds a crack in Vincent's cold heart. To see a bond so absolute be shattered by a man like Marcus offends his sense of order. He has spent his life avoiding the mess of human connection. A child is a variable he would never allow. Yet the sound of her breaking triggers something primal. The predator stands up and steps out of the shadows. Gloria freezes as he moves past her with the terrifying grace of a wolf. Ava does not even look up. She is lost in a photograph of a 5-year-old boy, a small face full of the kind of joy she is about to lose forever. "He has a striking face," Vincent says, his voice deep and steady. Ava jumps, her pupils blowing wide with fear as she tries to hide her ruinous papers. "I am sorry," she stammers, the reflex of a woman who has been beaten down for too long. He looms over her, a figure of dark elegance and hidden power. He is 6'2", of expensive wool and steel gray hair, his eyes reading her soul like a script. "Do not apologize," he says softly. "I saw your world ending and decided to stop it." She lets out a sound that is half laugh, half sob, waiting for him to mock her and leave. but he stays. He looks at her with a terrifying clinical focus, not with pity, but with the recognition of one survivor looking at another. I am not here to hurt you, he promises with deadly intent. I have the means to stop this bleeding. Ava's voice was a jagged shield, a cynical jab at the idea of a miracle. She blamed the crushing weight of the world for her sharp edge. Vincent's eyes drifted to the legal wreckage she was failing to hide beneath her trembling palms. A fight for your son? She bristled instantly, a wounded mother guarding her nest. Vincent eased back into the shadows, giving her air. But as he turned to leave, her silence shattered. They're taking him, she bled out, a raw, desperate confession. Vincent turned back with heavy, measured grace. Ava was a portrait of total collapse, her eyes burning as she stared at Eli's picture. The ultimatum was a shadow over the table, 12 noon tomorrow to conjure a home and a husband, or the father takes the boy. It's a mountain I can't climb, she choked out, burying her face in hands. Vincent stood like a statue, calculating the ruins. A ticking clock and a woman with no armor against a heartless system. It wasn't his fight, yet the hollow chamber of his heart was suddenly running a very different set of numbers. He watched the light flicker against her damp skin. Logic screamed for him to walk into the night, but his own inner vacuum demanded he stay. What if we solved both by daybreak? He asked softly. Ava's hands dropped, her eyes wide, and searching his face as if he were speaking a forgotten alien tongue. The air grew heavy. What? A roof and a ring, exactly what the judge demands. He held her gaze, the director of her next act. Ava let out a sharp, jagged laugh. Have you lost your mind? Do you know how insane this is? Completely, he said, his face remaining a mask of cold stone. I'm suggesting we marry. The words hung like smoke in the cold air. Ava recoiled, her pulse visible in her throat. You're delusional. You don't even know my name. I know you're a mother about to lose her soul, he countered, his voice a low, steady hum. I see a woman at midnight crushed by ink and despair, facing an ending in 12 hours. Ava's voice was a raw wire. Why? What's the catch? It was a fair question. Vincent's heart was a labyrinth of dark ghosts and a sudden, violent need to play the savior. He could have confessed the rot in his own heart, how his towers of cash felt like a grave. He might have admitted that saving her was a shot at his own redemption or a cure for his isolation. The thought that this lie could become a truth flickered, but he kept his armor on. Instead, he presented a cold front. I have wealth doing nothing. You have a hole that needs filling. I can bridge that gap. Ava's lip curled in pure instinct. Nobody is this kind. There is always a hidden cost, a hook in the bait. Everything has a price, he admitted. Your fear is smart, but look at the math. What happens at 12 noon if I walk away? The logic hit like a physical blow. Her walls crumbled. Exactly, he whispered. What's left to lose when the world is already gone? She searched for a reason to run, but the math of her pain pointed to the stranger. I have nothing, she whispered, an admission of her low status. Money is just noise, he replied. Vincent wasn't looking for profit. He was looking for a new soul to inhabit. My only goal is keeping your son with you, he said, his voice a low vibration. The rest is just paperwork. Ava searched his face for the ego of a madman. She found only a terrifying, focused stillness. Tell me your name, she demanded in a fragile whisper. Vincent Kane. The name meant nothing to her. She lived far from the blood and steel his world was built on. To her, he was just a strange, polished man. "I'm Ava Mercer," she responded. "If this is a game, I will kill you myself." "This is no game," Vincent cut in, his voice as final as a closing door. "You have my word. A stranger's word is worth 0. Then let me prove it." He slid into the booth, moving slowly so as not to spook her, closing the distance between their lives. "Show me the papers. Let's see how we win." Ava hesitated, then surrendered the legal stack. Vincent scanned the lines like a machine, his face an impenetrable wall of neutrality. When he finished, he looked up, the neon light catching the hardness in his eyes. "A house in a top district, money in the bank, and a marriage license." He let the words sink in. "This is easy." "In 12 hours?" she gasped, her voice breaking. "If we move right now," he replied, already rising from the worn leather seat. Vincent pulled out his phone, his mind moving pieces on a board. "I have a 4-bedroom house in Riverside Park that's sitting empty. We'll move you in tonight. My legal team will fast-track the marriage filing immediately. We don't have a second to waste. The office opens at 8. We're married by 9, certificates in hand by 10. He laid it out with the cold precision of a man planning a heist. Ava felt the floor fall away. "This is a nightmare. The world doesn't work like this." "Extreme times need a monster," Vincent said. "You're at 0. I'm the only exit left." Ava's suspicion peaked, her eyes searching for the hidden sin. "What do you want? Are you going to—" She couldn't finish. He didn't make her. He just watched her. "I won't touch you," he stated, killing her fear. "This is a contract, not a bedroom. Separate rooms, hard lines. Once the boy is safe, we'll get a clean divorce and walk away. No mess, no lingering ties, just a legal transaction to save a life." It was a masterclass in manipulation. Every instinct warned of a trap, but a tiny spark of hope whispered it was a miracle. "I need rules," Ava insisted, her voice tight with the last of her strength. She was negotiating with the devil for her heaven. "Name them." Vincent grabbed a pen and a napkin. "Separate beds, no touching, no demands." He wrote it down instantly. "Done. What else?" "Eli is the center of the world. I make every decision for him. You stay out of his life entirely." "Agreed, but I need the truth about you. I won't bring my son into a house of ghosts." This was the cliff's edge. Vincent had spent years hiding the blood on his hands. Now, to keep her, he'd have to offer a carefully crafted version of reality. Vincent played the part of the gray businessman, framing his empire as a series of tough choices. He kept his dark side in a box, promising Ava a safe haven for her boy. Ava's stomach twisted, a primal reaction to the apex predator sitting across from her. These gray areas were a minefield of ghosts and enemies. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs, sensing the heat of the fire. Caney smothered her panic with a promise of total protection, a move designed to make her depend entirely on his strength and shadow. He acted as her god and guardian, the architect of a new world. Ava was a mess of exhaustion, terror, and a tiny, insane hope. Her eyes stayed on Eli, who was dreaming in his bed, oblivious to the man who just bought his future. She thought of Marcus, the man who loved to see her lose. The system had already decided she wasn't enough. So Ava stopped running and placed her final bet on the stranger in the booth, trading her freedom for a chance to keep her heart. Ava lunges with a mother's hollow fury, a cornered animal snarling at a god. She clings to the boy as her only North Star. It is a pathetic, beautiful dance of a woman trying to pretend she still has a choice. A ghost of a smile haunts Kane's lips. He admires the predator in her, the instinct that keeps the weak alive. Under his gaze, her terror begins to rot, festering into a dark, twisted kind of dependency. The deal is sealed, the cold breath of a whisper. At precisely 12:47 in the morning, Kane begins his surgical work. He moves with the icy precision of a man filing a death warrant, binding her to his shadow. He dissects her life with a butcher's eye. The neighbor, Mrs. Chen, is just a loose thread in a frayed safety net. 7 a.m., he decrees, and Ava feels the tide of his will pulling her under. He sees the rust on her dead car not as a tragedy, but as a leash. Her desperation is his greatest asset. He hammers home the dawn deadline, making it clear that he is now the only oxygen left in her room. As he maps out their exit, Ava's mind fractures. She watches herself move through a waking nightmare. While she drifts, he builds a gilded cage of marriage licenses and asset sheets, brick by heavy legal brick. He tells her to sleep, his voice dripping with a cruel, patronizing grace. Ava breaks into a jagged, manic laugh at the horror of marrying a monster. He simply watches her, his face a mask of bored, elegant indifference. He drops a stack of bills like a heavy shroud, a reminder of who holds the light. He uses the boy's needs as a whip to drive her toward a bed. Her hands won't stop shaking as she gathers her ruins. Because I can, he says, a god justifying his own lightning strike. Then he vanishes into the biting March air. Ava stands alone in the silence, a survivor in the middle of a wasteland she used to call home. The waitress, Gloria, sees the wolf and tries to warn the lamb, but Ava already has her teeth bared in his defense. The lie is taking root. She has to believe her captor is her savior, or she will shatter. The darkness of the drive tastes like ash and coming storms. Tomorrow's hearing looms like a gallows. While she weighs the choice between the abyss and this devil, Kane is already pulling the strings of the world. The apartment is a tomb of static air. Little Eli sleeps, white-knuckling a stuffed dinosaur, unaware that his mother just sold her soul to keep the lights on for him. She whispers a promise to the dark, a prayer for a child who cannot hear her. She grips his small hand, feeling the crushing weight of her choices. He is the only thing keeping her from drifting away entirely. At 3 a.m., a text glows like a warning light. Bring the boys toys, he commands. A tactical move for a smooth takeover. The legal execution starts at 8:30. Sleep, he orders, a king from afar. She begs for a reason, a sliver of logic. He demands only her silence and her faith. Her heart hammers a frantic rhythm against her ribs, making sleep a ghost she can never quite catch. She knows this is madness, but in a world that wants her dead, this is her only card. She is trading her name for a chance to breathe. At 7 a.m., the black car arrives like a hearse. 7 a.m. arrives with a velvet engine hum. Her entire world is packed into 2 cheap bags. She spins a fairy tale about a new adventure for the boy, masking the scent of the trap with hope. A man named Thomas appears, his suit costing more than her life. Eli shrinks away, sensing the cold air of the elite. The shift is visceral. They are no longer citizens, but acquisitions of the Kane Empire. They bleed through the city's scars into its golden heart. Eli stares at the shimmering towers, wide-eyed at the sudden luxury. Ava watches from behind the dark glass, a ghost moving through a world of wealth. Are we rich now? The boy asks, his voice a testament to years of nothing. They stop at a grand brick house by the park. It is not a fortress, but a stage set designed to look like a home. Kane waits on the stairs, his sleeves rolled up in a performance of easy warmth. It is a masterclass in deception. He looks like a husband, a father, but beneath the linen shirt, the wolf is still hungry. The boy freezes, sensing the shadow. Cain drops to one knee, shrinking himself to seem human. He mirrors the child's small movements with a terrifying, practiced grace meant to kill a mother's doubt. He speaks the language of monsters and dinosaurs, winning the boy over with a kingdom of his own. Ava watches the trap snap shut with a sigh of relief, her mind fracturing under the weight of the lie. The house is a masterpiece of soft lights and curated clutter. It does not feel like a prison. It feels like a second chance, a beautiful hallucination that begins to erode Ava's last defenses. The boy's room is a sea of calming blues and ancient beasts, a trap designed to feel like a womb. Cain watches the child's reaction with the cold, unblinking eyes of a scientist at a microscope. Eli falls for the illusion instantly. Cain offers a few shallow choices to keep her occupied before pulling her away. The warmth vanishes. "The lawyers are waiting," he says, his voice flat and final. He gives her a floor to herself, a palace for a woman who had nothing. The excess makes her head spin. "It is for the boy," he says, using her son's name like a shield for his own obsession. She walks through the house in a daze, forgetting for a moment the blood on the contract. He snaps her back to reality. The only thing that matters now is the ink and the law in his pocket. Eli's fear turns to excitement as they drive to the courthouse. A shark in a suit waits for them with a stack of papers that will erase time and bureaucracy. The cage is closing shut. The lawyer moves with the speed of a guillotine. No questions, no delays. Ava signs where she is told, her voice a hollow echo. She stops asking why and starts simply existing in his wake. Under the fluorescent hum of a government office, they play their parts. He kisses her, a cold, practiced brush of skin that tastes like a business deal. There is no love here, only an agreement. Her heart hammers against her ribs as the ink dries. The transformation is complete. In the eyes of the law, she is no longer a runaway. She is a queen in his empire, tethered to him. "Mrs. Cain?" they call her, and the name feels like a brand. With 90 minutes until the hearing, he puts a hand on her shoulder. It is not a comfort, it is a leash for the slaughter ahead. "You are not a victim anymore," he whispers, rewriting her soul. "You are mine." While Eli plays, Ava realizes the true war has not even begun. The system was just the first hurdle. Cain is the race. They walk into the courthouse like gods descending. Cain radiates a power that makes the walls feel small. The lawyer carries the folders that will bury her past forever, turning the law into his servant. The shadow of the towering pillars falls over the broken souls in the lobby. Elena's breath hitches. The weight of her past is a physical presence. Beside her, Leo watches the dust motes dance, his innocence fraying in the sterile air. A soft whisper and a gentle lie keep the boy's world from shattering. Leo reaches for Adrian's hand, seeking a father in the void. They look like a family, a perfect, heartbreaking imitation of love. Adrian has bought the boy's loyalty with kindness and expensive toys. They walk a corridor that smells of industrial bleach and lost causes, a graveyard for the fractured families that came before them. Faces in the hallway are masks of grief. Sarah pulls them into a shadow, her eyes scanning for exits. She checks her watch, performing one last audit of their lives before the gavel falls. The doors swing open as Marcus enters. Elena goes rigid, her pulse thundering like a trapped bird. He smiles, a practiced, terrifying display of warmth that hides the predatory wolf beneath the skin. Marcus scans Elena's face like a prize he lost, then turns his cold gaze toward Adrian. Elena steps forward, a lioness guarding her cub. The two men measure each other, a silent prologue to war. Marcus spits a jagged insult to cut them down. Adrian doesn't flinch. He simply stares back with eyes like a winter storm. Elena raises her chin, wielding her new wedding ring like a shield. The competitor's reputation drains the color from Marcus's face. He stammers, calling their union a cheap fiction, a desperate play written in the 11th hour to steal what is rightfully his. Sarah counters with the smooth delivery of a veteran storyteller. She frames the marriage not as a sudden whim, but as a long, simmering secret kept safe from Marcus's venomous, manipulative reach. The opposing lawyer, charging $500 an hour, scoffs at Elena's sudden fortune. He claims her wealth is a statistical myth. Sarah stands firm, insisting that this union is beyond reproach.
The defense points to the Riverside estate, a fortress of wealth against the accusations of ruin. Marcus pivots, softening his voice and donning a paternal mask for the audience's benefit.
He performs a grotesque theater of affection for the boy. Leo, dazzled by the promise of a bedroom the size of a house, doesn't see the hook hidden inside the bait. The bailiff calls the case. Elena's hands shake, her skin cold to the touch. Adrian's hand finds the small of her back, a steadying weight, reminding her she is no longer a victim. Elena tries to internalize her new power. She steps across the threshold into the courtroom, the air thick with the smell of old paper and the finality of a Greek tragedy. Judge Thorne sits upon the bench, her face a map of exhaustion and doubt. She peers over her glasses, ready to dissect the messy remains of this fractured family unit. The interrogation begins. The court examines the paper trail of Elena's life, checking if 30 days was enough time to turn a tragedy into a stable home for the child. The clock was reset today. Patricia presented the dossiers with a flourish. Elena wed Vincent Caney yesterday. They reside at 847 Riverside Park Drive, a 4-bedroom home in an elite district. Certificates and deeds were submitted like holy relics. Judge Brenner scanned them with a forensic, unreadable gaze. "Your rebuttal?" she prompted. Brennan stood, his face twisted into a sneer of unfiltered contempt. "This is a farce," Brennan growled. "She was penniless and broken months ago. Then 24 hours before this hearing, she finds a savior. This isn't a marriage. It's a desperate, transparent forgery." "This timeline shows she is decisive, not fraudulent," Patricia countered. Brennan demanded a cross-examination. A sickening sense of dread settled in Ava's stomach. She was a bird flying blindly into a trap. She was cognitively unprepared for the stand. Her motor functions failed as she walked. Marcus watched like a predator, while Leo's confused eyes cut deeper than any blade. "How long have you known him?" Brennan asked, his voice dripping with false concern. Elena's mind raced. She whispered that it has been recently, then claimed several months. The lie tasted like copper. No photos, no digital trail, not even your own mother knew. Brennan paced like a wolf. Elena's throat tightened. The silence in the room was a vacuum where her future used to be. He revealed her mother's betrayal. Elena's breath hitches. "Isn't it true?" Brennan leaned in, his voice a low hiss. "That you met this man in a diner only 48 hours ago?" Elena looks at Vincent. He gives a microscopic nod, a signal to burn it all down with the truth. Patricia objects, her voice a desperate plea to the judge to ignore the timeline. "The timing is everything," Brennan snapped. "She bought a husband. She contracted a stranger with a dark, suspicious past to perform in this courtroom theater for the sake of a child." Patricia's objection was a scream in the dark. Brennan ignored it, handing the judge a heavy file detailing Vincent's hidden world, the corporations, the shadows, and the blood money that built their home. The judge's face turned to stone. She looked at Vincent. "Rise and speak," she commanded. Vincent stood, his jaw tight, the only sign of the storm raging beneath his perfectly tailored suit. "Have you been investigated?" A heavy cinematic pause. "Several times. I have never been charged. He describes his empire, real estate and logistics, in a voice as cold and flat as a grave. Your friends are monsters, the judge noted. Vincent's eyes remained fixed. I cannot control who populates the world of global commerce, he said, his honesty a sharp, technical blade. Ava caught the subtle tremor in his voice. He wasn't claiming innocence, merely a lack of conviction. Judge Brenner exhaled, closing the report with a heavy wooden thud. Mrs. Kane returned to the stand. Ava's fingers laced together in a desperate white-knuckled grip to hide the rattling of her bones. I have a binary question, Judge Brenner said, her tone shifting to a cold, clinical softness. Is this a marriage of souls or a contract of convenience? Is there a genuine bond, or is this just a scheme to bypass the law? Ava stood on the edge of a Greek tragedy, choosing between a lie and a truth that might orphan her heart. She looked at Eli, whose wide eyes were mirrors of absolute trust. Then she turned to Vincent, a pillar of shadow and steel. I have you, his silence whispered. Ava took the leap. The wedding was sudden, she began, her voice a low cello. The timing was forced by this court, but the heart of it is no fiction. Vincent was a sanctuary when the world turned to glass. He offered me a dignity and a quiet strength that... She faltered, the silence a jagged wound. More respect than Marcus ever knew how to give. So you admit this was a transactional charade for the bench? Brennan lunged, his voice a serrated blade. I am saying... Vincent saw a soul in ruins and chose to act, Ava countered, her spine turning to iron. Yes, it was fast. Yes, it was a response to your deadlines. But that doesn't make it a lie. It is simply an unconventional rescue. Unconventional is a generous mask, Brennan sneered. Your Honor, this woman is so fragile she has tethered herself to a ghost from the underworld. All of this to keep a son from a nurturing father? Nurturing, the word tore from Ava like a scream from a nightmare. You want to speak of care? Let us pull back the curtain on why I fled his house. Patricia tried to cut the power, but the dam had burst. Let us examine the medical records from the night I tripped down the stairs. Tears carved tracks through her makeup as the emotional flood hit the light. Or the summers I wore long sleeves to hide the purple blooms on my skin. Let us discuss a father who threatens a 6-year-old with blood for spilling a drink. A tomb-like silence fell. Marcus erupted, a cornered beast. Lies! Sit down, Mr. Chen, the judge thundered. Brenner's analytical gaze was now a cold, unreadable mask. Mrs. Kane, are you formally alleging a pattern of domestic battery? Yes. Ava's voice was a silver thread, yet it choked the room. I am alleging exactly that. Why is the record silent? Why was this buried in the divorce? Because, Ava whispered, I was drowning in a sea of fear. He had the gold and the guards. I had nothing. I thought a silent exit was the only way to save Eli. I believed the law looked for safety and love, not bank statements. But the system was rigged, wasn't it? Because I am poor, working 2 jobs, and living in a basement flat. Apparently those things weigh more than Marcus's crimes and his generational wealth. She was weeping openly now, the script of the trial forgotten. So, yes, I married Vincent in haste. But I married a man who is gentle with my boy, who respects my space, and who made sure Eli had a room filled with every dream he ever had. I married a man who threw me a rope and asked for nothing in return. It isn't traditional, and it doesn't fit your charts, but it is real. it is more authentic than the mask Marcus wears for this room. Judge Brenner leaned back, dissecting Ava with the precision of a surgeon. The judge's focus pivoted to Marcus, whose face was a study in boiling, repressed rage. "Mr. Brennan, do you have a rebuttal for these specific sins?" Brennan leaned into a hushed, desperate huddle with his client. "Pure fiction, Your Honor. No police calls, no orders, zero evidence. These are the ghost stories of a desperate woman. I have the proof." Vincent's voice vibrated from the back, low and lethal. Every head snapped toward him. "Mr. Kane," the judge noted, a brow arching, "you have evidence of battery." Vincent rose, a calm executioner with a phone. "When Ava told me her truth, I sent my men to find the files, the ER visits, the logs, the neighbors who heard the screams." Vincent shattered the procedural script by presenting a crushing dossier, a tactical strike that left the room paralyzed between fury and clinical awe. The magistrate beckoned him forward, her face a mask of iron as she called for a private briefing. The judge demanded a look at the digital blood work before it hit the record. As she scrolled, the muscles in her jaw turned to stone, her eyes reflecting the horror of the data. 30-minute recess, she declared, her voice a sharp crack in the heavy air. The room dissolved into a pressure cooker of high-tension friction. Brennan lunged at Caney, spitting venom about the withheld files. But Vincent stood like a granite cliff. He remained devoid of emotion, letting the lawyer's rage break harmlessly against his stoic neutrality. Caney had given her the agency to keep her secrets or burn the bridge. Despite the tremors in her hands, Ava felt a tectonic shift in her soul. She chose the fire, deciding to look the brutal reality of her past in the eye without blinking. Her counsel tried to anchor her with deep, rhythmic breaths. They were bracing for the next blow when a new shadow fell across the floor. The elevator chimed, and Ava's pupils dilated in an instant flash of primal terror. A phalanx of predatory archetypes stepped out, moving with the rhythmic grace of career wolves. At the center stood a mountain of a man, a physical threat so acute that Vincent's posture shifted into a coiled, combat-ready spring. Dmitri, the lead wolf, used a thick, honeyed dialect to start the psychological war. He weaponized the courtroom setting, mocking Vincent's new role as a delusional knight protecting a common waitress in a game of house. Ava felt the world go cold as she recognized the monsters Vincent had described. Dmitri wore a mask of mock innocence, daring Vincent to spill blood right here, within the hallowed, high-security walls of the law. Dmitri framed the moment as a business crisis, a distraction caused by Vincent's new heart. As Vincent tried to negotiate a 5-minute window to settle the debt, the court officer stepped in, enforcing the rigid, ticking clock of the institution. The villain offered a classic, tragic choice: the Empire or the girl. Ava felt the old panic clawing at her throat, anticipating the moment Vincent would realize she wasn't worth the war and leave her to the wolves. But Vincent didn't reach for a gun. He reached for the power of the room. By branding the men as agents of witness intimidation, he triggered a security trap. The judicial system, once his enemy, became his personal shield. Vincent seized absolute control, dismissing the threat with a few cold, lethal words. The security team swarmed, dragging Dmitri and his unit back into the shadows, restoring a fragile clinical order to the halls of justice. Dmitri spat a final, bloody promise over his shoulder. Vincent watched the doors close, acknowledging the persistent shadow of the threat, but keeping his eyes on the prize, filing the debt away for a darker day. When the court reconvened, the opposition looked like hollowed-out shells. The magistrate began her final review of the dossier, which laid out the empirical, undeniable map of the violence Ava had endured in her first marriage. The files spoke of shattered bones and midnight sirens, a grim choir confirming her story of abuse. The judge turned her gaze on Marcus, stripping away his narcissism and his lies to reveal the violent ghost hiding behind the wealth. The judge swept aside the frantic objections, noting the evidence was a mountain that couldn't be moved. She admitted that while Ava's new life was unconventional and fast, the safety of the child was the only light that mattered. Ava waited for the strike, for the condemnation of her desperate heart. But the judge saw no fraud in the shadows. She saw a woman who had built a fortress out of necessity, choosing a dark protector over a golden monster. The bench saw through the cruelty, recognizing the father's lawsuits as a twisted noose of control. The judge's cold gaze turned toward the boy, weighing the child's future against the sanctuary he'd finally found. Finding zero safety in the father's house, the judge seized the room like a grand orchestrator. She cut his desperate pleas short, a final curtain falling on his reign of shadows. The mother kept her son, while the father was shackled to supervised visits and forced reform. For Caney and Ava, a 6-month sentence of state surveillance had just begun. The judge demanded a solemn oath of devotion from the mother. Ava finally broke, her sob echoing as the sharpest blades of her legal nightmare finally withdrew into the dark. The court peeled back Caney's stoic mask, warning that a child needs a father's heart, not a strategist's move. Caney bowed his head, his low "I will" sealing the pact before the room emptied. As the gavel's thunder died, the adrenaline vanished. The boy whispered for his dinosaur-painted walls, his only true fortress. Behind them, the father was led out, his jaw tight with a silent, murderous fury. The father's eyes promised a bloody sequel of vengeance. On the marble steps, the lawyer called Caney's 11th-hour evidence a dangerous, winning move in a high-stakes war of minds. Their counsel told them to build a stage, 6 months of playing house. They needed a trail of bank statements and practiced smiles to sell the lie of a perfect functional union. Squinting in the harsh afternoon sun, Ava whispered her profound thanks. Caney's mask shifted instantly, his voice softening as he offered a simple dinner to ground the boy and bind their secret alliance. The boy's spirit bounced back from the trauma of the robes. Ava knew the wolves were still outside, but for the first time, she wasn't facing the dark alone as she leaned on Caney. Caney stood like a monolith, his hand on her shoulder a steady, heavy weight. A single glance passed between them, the protector and the rescued, forging a deep bond in the heavy silence. "We will fix this," he promised, his voice an anchor in her storm. Despite his history of lies, she let herself believe him. A classic surrender to the one who saved her. The car pulled away toward a high-walled sanctuary, a future still dark, but no longer hopeless. Little Eli babbled about prehistoric monsters and snacks, blissfully unaware his world had almost burned. Ava reached for Vincent's hand, and his grip was iron. They were no longer running, they were soldiers in a shared operational war. They stopped at a diner 3 blocks away, a place where the staff knew names. Eli inhaled his burger, dreaming of new toys, but Ava's throat was tight with the bitter, lingering aftertaste of fear. Vincent watched her tremble for 10 minutes before speaking. He tried to pull her back to the simple things, eating, sleeping, the boy. But her inner sirens were still screaming about the shadows to come. Dimitri's ghost loomed in every corner of her mind. Outside, Eli touched the new swing set Vincent had built overnight, his little hands hesitant as if the ground might vanish once again. "He needs to learn that the floor won't fall out," Vincent noted, sliding a coffee toward her as a silent peace offering. When she asked about the fight at the court, his jaw tightened, a flicker of the beast beneath. He named the monsters, the Volov Syndicate. He was trying to cut the cord, and they were trying to bleed him for it. He laid out the truth, the smuggling, the shadows, looking her dead in the eye. "I told you I was a ghost. This is what happens when ghosts are seen," he said. Ava felt the floor tilt. She and her son were now just bargaining chips in a mobster's game. For a second, Vincent looked human in his regret. The syndicate wanted their cut and his total silence. Vincent gripped the counter until his knuckles went white, trying to claw his way into the light while the underworld pulled him back by the throat. To the mob, going straight is the ultimate betrayal. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that Vincent's promise of protection just made them the biggest targets of opportunity in the city. Vincent argued his cage was better than her ex-husband's. He offered walls and guards, but Ava looked at the cameras and saw only a different kind of prison, built into the constant threat of blood. He swore he had a way out, a long con to bury the Volovs. He was playing the double agent, pretending to serve them while building a gallows out of legal red tape and strategic lies. Then came the bombshell. He'd been a federal snitch for 6 months. He was burning down the whole trafficking empire from the inside out. By telling her, he'd handed her his life on a silver platter. Only the feds knew. Ava's mind spun as the pieces clicked. He hadn't just escaped the law in court. He was the law's secret weapon, hiding the truth in plain sight to save them. He didn't claim to be a hero. It was a cold trade. Their heads for his clean slate. He was systematically murdering his old self to become someone the world would finally let live. He called saving her his first act that didn't have a price tag. A man who had everything but felt nothing, finding a reason to breathe in the desperate hope of her redemptive story. Vincent mapped her soul, then offered heavy, clinical comfort. Peace shattered. Vincent became a lethal shadow, guarding them. Marcus arrived. Ava froze as the past ghost breathed. Vincent dismantled Marcus's lies with cold, surgical, legal precision. Marcus barked. Vincent whispered a promise of judicial ruin. Predatory promises sent Marcus fleeing into the roaring night. Adrenaline hummed. A digital trail had led the wolf. Steel replaced safety. Vincent demanded Ava reject the victim's heart. Their diner-born pact became an obsessive, singular shared fate. Seeing Eli's innocence, Ava chose this war and this man. She accepted the terms, binding her life to his. Ava sought the Alpha amidst the war room's blue glow. He offered sanctuary. He's bleeding the Volkov syndicate dry now. Volkovs will want blood. The kinetic shift arrives in weeks. He mapped storms, vowing her safety as holy law. She probed. He tapped out a rhythmic, scarred, dark memory. He whispered of a monster father and a mother's flight. She died broken. Young Vincent watched her struggle collapse. He transformed childhood trauma into an obsessive drive for power. Saving Ava was penance for the woman he couldn't save. Ava touched him. He remained a cynical, maternal ghost hunter. Her hand found his. Hope sparked in the heavy silence. Dangerous chemistry flared. Ava retreated before the fire caught. He swore to be her shield, an absolute, non-conditional rock. Manufactured domesticity reigned behind 21 days of steel gates. Vincent played father. Eli thrived while Ava left her jobs. They played family until their lives became one tangled web. Wealth merged. Ava saw millions and felt vertigo. He commanded her to abandon her thrift, a decree that forced her into a surreal, learned luxury. She began to drift through gilded boutiques without the usual tightening in her chest, selecting fine silks for herself and the boy. A haunting departure from the desperate arithmetic of her past life. She retreated into the quiet theater of the home, orchestrating evening meals to soften the jagged edges of their reality. While Vincent navigated the high-stakes shadows of law and iron, she provided the warmth. these dinners evolved from a choreographed duty into the sacred grounding pulse of a family being born in the dark. In the amber glow of the living room, Vincent played the devoted father, dissecting the boys' playground epics with the focus of a surgeon. He translated the cold machinery of his empire into fables a child could hold. Ava watched from the shadows, her heart a bruised thing as she witnessed the monster truly love. Beneath this fragile peace, the gears of the criminal world were grinding louder. Vincent vanished for hours into the heavy silence of his study, his voice a low, gravelly vibration against the storm. The air in the house grew thick and electric, heavy with the ozone of a looming catastrophe. A federal shadow named Sarah Chen became a ghost, haunting their midnight halls. Vincent built a wall of silence around Ava, practicing a cruel sort of mercy. He believed that the less she held of his sins, the safer she remained from the fires he was fanning. He spoke of the Volkoff's vengeance in the hollow, clinical tones of a death sentence, demanding she surrender her will to his protection. To keep their fragile world spinning, she buried her own tremors, carrying the weight of his secrets like a silent martyr. On day 23, the silence shattered. A call from a hidden number bypassed her armor, a woman's voice sharp and professional on the other end. When the caller used her old name, Ava corrected her with a tragic, steady pride, claiming her place as a Kane. The voice belonged to Jennifer Chen, the woman tethered to the villainous Marcus. The name struck Ava like a physical blow. Jennifer spoke of a summit between wives, two women caught in the orbit of the same predatory man, their fates suddenly and violently aligned. Ava's suspicion was a wall of ice, but Jennifer used the ultimate lever, a whispered threat against the boy. The mother in Ava roared, drowning out the survivor's caution. She begged for the truth, but the line was a wiretap, and the secrets were too heavy for the air. A meeting was set for 1200 hours in the harsh glare of the public eye. No protectors, no escape. Ava hung up and felt the floor tilt. She knew with a cold certainty that she was walking into a trap, a play orchestrated by Marcus to lead her to the gallows. Yet, the missing pieces of her son's safety pulled at her like a tide. Vincent was lost in legal wars. The child was locked behind school gates and digital codes. A narrow, jagged window of opportunity had opened, and she prepared to step through it alone. She bartered with her soul, calling it a calculated risk, but her blood knew the truth. In the twisted landscape of her trauma, nothing Marcus touched was ever stable. Ultimately, her frantic need to shield the child paralyzed her reason, driving her straight toward the flame. At 11:45, she left a lie in a handwritten note. Behind the wheel of a nondescript sedan, she moved toward Fifth Avenue, her hands trembling against the leather. The cafe, Common Grounds, was a stage of industrial brick and false safety, waiting for the curtain to rise. She saw Jennifer immediately, a woman held together by expensive armor and brittle nerves. When Ava arrived, the air between them vibrated with tension. Ava stood tall, a statue of defiance, refusing the vulnerability of a chair and demanding the truth be laid bare. Jennifer pleaded for calm, her eyes a map of chronic exhaustion beneath the makeup. She delivered a grim prophecy. Marcus was using the courts as a weapon, planning to use Vincent's blood-stained profile to tear the boy from Ava's arms forever. Ava tried to invoke Vincent's federal protection, but Jennifer's look was a tomb. The reality was more invasive. Marcus had been watching them, his eyes in every shadow of the Kane home. Ava felt the invisible touch of his gaze like spiders crawling across her skin. The hunt had been going on for weeks, a slow-motion dissection of their sanctuary. Marcus had built an archive of their lives fueled by a scorched earth obsession. Jennifer leaned in, a desperate warning. He didn't want the child. He wanted the total annihilation of Ava's soul, Under the weight of the moment, Jennifer confessed her own tragedy. She had been seduced by a monster's tears, only to be crushed by his need for absolute dominance. She was living the same suffocating nightmare Ava had barely escaped, the volatile temper and the golden cage. Jennifer spoke of how Marcus viewed people as assets to be reclaimed, never loved. Ava felt a sickening wave of pity for the woman taking her place. Then Jennifer slid a dossier across the table, a lethal map of the legal landmines Marcus had planted for the Kane operation. The papers were the script for a slaughter scheduled for the following week. It was never about fatherly love. It was about the exquisite pleasure of punitive destruction. Marcus was using their son as a scalpel to perform a final public execution of Ava's heart. The fragile truce shattered as Jennifer's face went white with terror. Marcus strode into the room, a tidal wave of megalomaniac rage. He was flanked by men who didn't carry law books. They carried the cold, heavy scent of wet pavement and violence. He spat the word traitor at his wife, his eyes burning with a dark, possessive light. To Marcus, Ava's new life was a personal insult, a violation of his divine right to own her. He viewed the entire meeting as a breach of his absolute authority. Then came the reveal. He had filmed the entire encounter with surgical precision. His smile was a sadistic triumph. He had her exactly where he wanted, caught in a web of criminal collusion. Ava felt a wave of acute panic as the walls of the trap closed in. She begged for the boy's sake, her voice a thin thread of hope. But Marcus was a stone. He mocked her intellect, his tone shifting to that chilling, intimate whisper of a predator who has finally cornered his prey and intends to savor the kill. He sneered at her attempt to find a new protector. Then, a new shadow moved. A man with a voice like grinding stones and a Slavic lilt. He suggested they move to the dark. Ava's blood turned to ice as she recognized the vocal fingerprint of a true killer. These weren't Marcus's men. They were the Volkov's wolves. They looked at Marcus with pure disgust, dismissing his amateur dramatics. It was clear now. In his blind hunger for revenge, Marcus had invited the devil to the table, contracting with the very monsters Vincent feared. The killer's gaze lingered on Ava, marking her as the ultimate prize to break Vincent Kane. In his pathetic quest to ruin her, Marcus had opened the gates for the wolves. He had traded her safety and his soul for a moment of hollow victory. Marcus still clung to his delusions of moral height, claiming he was saving her. He had bartered the secrets of his own family to the Russian Mafia for a chance to win. The associate's eyes were predatory, signaling an immediate and grave end to her freedom. That ultimatum was a cold blade. Come quietly or die in public. Jennifer, finding a final spark of courage, tried to scream the truth at Marcus, that he had signed their death warrants. He silenced her with a look, the final tragic act of a man drowning in his own shadow. Jennifer ignited a diversion, a desperate signal for them to vanish into the night. The world fractured into a blur of frantic shadows as the danger took hold. Ava's heart thundered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat of terror. She became a creature of pure reflex, guarding her secrets with every gasping breath. A crushing grip seized her in the darkness of the lot, concrete turning into a trap. Then Kane stepped into the frame, his eyes devoid of warmth. The loving husband had vanished, replaced by a cold-blooded ghost of a man. Every trace of his domestic life was stripped away, revealing the lethal predator beneath. The Volkov dog held his ground, a snarl fixed against Kane's icy authority. Vincent dismantled the man's bravado with a clinical, biting critique of his failures. It was a dance of two monsters beneath the flickering lights. The operative sneered at Kane's suburban life, mocking the wedding ring as a noose around a killer's neck. The traitor suggested that Kane's heart had grown soft, from poison of a quiet life. He spoke of using Ava as a tool for a bloody re-education, a way to drag Cain back to the syndicate's fold. She was no longer a person to them, only a lever to be pulled until Cain broke. Cain moved with the sudden, terrifying grace of a lightning strike, ending the threat in a single heartbeat. His gaze never wavered from the enemy as he shoved Ava toward the waiting car. He threw her into the steel sanctuary as the night air filled with the heavy tension of a terminal standoff. Marcus had slithered away, his cowardice as bright as a flare when the bullets began to fly. Inside the car, the driver's knuckles were white against the wheel, his calm a thin mask for his rising panic. As the trees swallowed the road, the phone chirped, a direct line to Cain's iron voice. Cain's words were sharp as glass, heavy with the weight of a mission gone wrong. He tore into her for breaking the rules, his voice a low growl of professional fury. He saw her pain, but he demanded her silence. The woman he loved had become the one variable that could burn his world down. The clock had run out, and the game had shifted into a lethal new phase. With the Volkovs watching, Cain pulled the federal trigger, setting the heavy gears of the law in motion. He ordered her to grab the boy and run, leaving their entire life behind for the sake of survival. Ava's soul flared with a fierce, stubborn fire, a refusal to be cast aside. But Cain's logic was a cold blade, cutting through her heart. She was a target, a weakness he could not afford. When he spoke of their son, her resistance collapsed. For the child, she would walk into the dark. She retreated into herself, a wounded animal seeking the silence of a cave. Caney was moving them to a hidden fortress upstate, severing every digital ghost that followed them. Though her mother's heart screamed to resist, the crushing weight of the parking lot assault broke her spirit. She finally accepted the safety of the shadows. A crack appeared in Caney's iron mask, a rare flicker of guilt for failing to predict the coward's betrayal. It was a fleeting moment of humanity before the professional killer returned to the surface. He cut the call short, a sharp and final goodbye, leaving the heavy work of her broken heart to Thomas. The safe house felt like a tomb, a haunting echo of the home she had just lost. She had only 30 minutes to pack her life before vanishing into the void of federal protection. Her mind was a whirlpool of thoughts about Caney, her soul tied to a man dancing on the edge of a blade. A sense of deep betrayal settled in her bones. She was merely moving from one cage to another. The 2-hour drive into the northern wilderness felt like an exile. The silence of the forest was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that made every snap of a twig sound like a gunshot. Little Eli had finally drifted into a heavy, exhausted sleep, his mind shielding him from the storm. His innocent peace was a jagged contrast to Ava's unraveling sanity. She sat by the window, her phone a useless glowing stone in her hand, staring into the black wall of the trees. Thomas moved through the house with mechanical precision, turning the cabin into a digital fortress. Cameras watched every corner, their unblinking red eyes tracking her every move. Despite the food laid out before her, Ava's throat was tight with a fear that made hunger a distant, forgotten memory. Thomas's empty promises of safety fell on deaf ears. Ava was living a borrowed nightmare, feeling every phantom blow Caney might be taking in the dark. She reached for her phone 3 times in 2 hours, a desperate, silent plea for a sign that he was still drawing breath. The silence from the outside world was absolute. In the vacuum of that quiet, she turned to the papers Jennifer had left behind, a roadmap of a man she didn't recognize. Grainy photos showed Caney in the shadows, moving bags of blood money. To the world, he looked like a common monster. She looked closer, her eyes searching for the truth hidden in the forensic blur. These weren't crimes. They were the desperate acts of a man burrowing deep into the heart of a beast. He was a surgeon with a scalpel, meticulously harvesting the data needed to tear the Volkov syndicate apart from the inside. Kaney's true mission was the total destruction of an empire, a slow-motion collapse of blood and capital. Marcus, blinded by his own petty spite, had seen the truth and chosen to twist it into a weapon for court. He was willing to burn Kane's soul just to win a hollow victory. Then a shadow emerged from the documents, a woman with dark hair who was always there, standing just behind Kaney. She was a constant, a professional ghost sharing his most dangerous hours. The sight of her triggered a sharp, cold ache of jealousy that Ava couldn't suppress. Her memory clicked, the face finally finding a name in the archives of her mind. The stranger was no mistress, but a federal agent named Sarah Chen. Marcus's spy had caught Kaney in the act of being a hero, mistaking the long arm of the law for the grip of a criminal. The irony was a bitter pill. The evidence meant to bury him was actually his salvation. A sudden sound from the driveway shattered her thoughts. Ava's heart skipped a beat as she dove for the floor, watching the long fingers of headlights sweep across the ceiling of her dark sanctuary. It wasn't an assassin at the door, but the man himself. Kaney climbed out at the steel beast of his truck, his face a map of the war he had just finished. He was bruised and broken, but his presence alone felt like the sun breaking through a storm, dragging her back from the ledge. She wanted to scream at him for the terror, but her voice died as he pulled her into a crushing, desperate embrace. He held her as if she were the only thing keeping him on this earth. In that silence, his hands told the story of a man who had finally come home from hell. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, the sound of a man who had seen too much. He told her the Hydra was dead. 4 raids had decapitated the Volkov Empire in a single night. 18 men were in chains, and the shadow that had haunted their lives had finally been burned away. The transformation was complete. The ghost had returned to the light. He had given hours of testimony, trading his dark secrets for a clean slate and a federal seal of protection. He had shed his criminal skin, emerging from the fire as a man the law could finally touch. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a release of 6 months of held terror. He was out, leaving the gray world for a life they could finally call their own. Ava wept against his chest, finally seeing the martyr where she once saw only a captor in the dark. Under the harsh glare of the spotlight, Kaney performs his reassurance ritual, a quiet confession of the tactical blunder regarding Marcus's shadow alliance. He calls it hubris, the fatal pride of a man who believed he could keep his inner demons from bleeding into the light. Meanwhile, in the wings, federal agents haul Marcus into the cold machinery of justice for his dance with the Volkov family. The legal guillotine falls heavily on Marcus. Recruiting hired wolves to haunt the mother of his child is a federal sin that leaves a permanent stain. He might dodge a steel cage due to his pedigree, but his social standing and legal weight are turned to ash. His desperate play for the boy is effectively strangled in the cradle. The word liberated rings out like a funeral bell in the quiet room. Instead of the expected rush of joy, Ava is struck by a sudden, dizzying vertigo. Their bond was a structure built entirely on the architecture of fear. Now that the threat has vanished, the utilitarian glue of their union has dissolved, leaving her standing on the edge of an identity abyss. What happens tomorrow? The patient's whisper is a search for a new map. Kaney, feeling the tectonic plates of their dynamic shift, retreats into the shadows. He sheds his armor, revealing a rare, raw vulnerability. He has stepped down from the pedestal of the protector and now stands like a man awaiting a death sentence, unsure if he has any value in a world at peace. Kaney slides a golden parachute across the table. Unlimited wealth, a sanctuary of her own and a legacy for the boy. He is handing her the very autonomy he once stripped away. It is the ultimate test. He is placing the key to the birdcage in her palm, desperate to see if she will fly away or choose the golden bars of her own free will. His body is a portrait of rigid tension, every muscle a coiled spring. He insists the choice is hers alone, erasing any shadow of a moral debt. It is the tragic final act of a man trying to outrun his nature, offering total freedom to the only person he wishes to hold, proving his love through the agony of self-denial. Ava dissects the man standing in the twilight, the dark savior who emerged from the wreckage. He has woven a perfect safety net of gold, iron, and silence. The fact that he is willing to become a ghost for her sake is the final, poetic piece of evidence she needs to rewrite the legend of his character in her mind. The subject pushes the exit strategy aside. Her voice becomes the bridge from a mere arrangement to a real partnership. She declares that her desire to stay isn't a symptom of her past trauma or situational need, but the result of a slow, beautiful, emotional evolution that took root over the last 30 days. A flicker of hope ignites in Kaney's eyes like a distant star. Ava reclaims her power, swearing that for the first time in her life, her heart is uncoerced. She chooses him. As she closes the physical distance, the tactical contract is burned, and the curtain rises on the study of a voluntary, unbreakable bond. The scene shifts to a heavy, tactile intimacy. Vincent's hands grip her shoulders as if she might vanish into thin air. He admits his obsession took root the moment he saw her tending to Eli. It was a psychological turning point where her domestic light finally neutralized 20 years of hollow internal silence and chronic emotional starvation. Vincent is haunted by a guilt complex, wondering if a man with his shadow has the right to ask for her light after dragging her through hell. Ava, however, rejects the role of the victim. She sees him as her shield, not her master. She presses her hands to his chest, monitoring the frantic rhythm of his heart in a silent attempt to soothe his fractured nervous system. Ava describes her marriage as a living nightmare, a map of a world where she never learned how to be loved. Despite the scars, she offers to build something functional from the ruins. Vincent answers not with words, but with a kiss born of primal desperation. A stark, tragic contrast to the hollow, performative touch of their wedding day. Ava's body responds with a sensory awakening, a flicker of life in nerves long dead from the cold of trauma. After the touch, Vincent collapses into a moment of raw fragility, leaning his head against hers. He vows his devotion, but issues a clinical warning. His mind is a fortress of old wars, perhaps lacking the gears for a normal life. The man admits to 20 years spent in a self-imposed exile behind walls of stone and silence. Ava counters this with a demand for total, radical honesty. She insists they burn the professional masks and replace them with a transparency that hurts, demanding the truth even when it feels like a blade against the skin. Vincent is plagued by a failure of character, terrified he cannot play the part of a father or a husband in the light. He fears her choice is just a shadow of necessity. Ava mirrors his dread, admitting her own paralyzing fear of another betrayal, her heart still echoing with the ghost of Marcus's cruelty. The air is thick with the existential dread of two people realizing how fragile their peace truly is. Ava argues that fear isn't a sign to stop, but a reason to hold on tighter. Vincent's kiss acts as a silent oath, followed by a playful threshold ritual as he carries her into the next room, a visual vow to be her sanctuary. Vincent makes his intentions clear. He wants the intimacy of a shared breath and restorative sleep over the heat of the moment. He notes they have both lived on adrenaline and ghosts for weeks. Ava's playful doubt marks the return of her true self. A spark of life is safe within the fortress of his presence. He outlines a slow de-escalation, choosing to win her heart through a traditional courtship to prove this isn't just a bond of shared blood. He places the child's peace above his own needs. For Ava, this intentionality is a radical gift. He is giving her the power of choice, an act of grace that leaves her emotionally overwhelmed. They drift into a state of nocturnal communion, sharing whispers that build a bridge to the future. Vincent speaks of leaving the underworld for a life in the sun. Ava reveals long-buried dreams, shifting her focus from basic survival to a new era of self-actualization, reclaiming the story she was meant to live. Ava's path toward social work is a sublimation of her own pain, a way to turn her history into a weapon for good. Vincent affirms her agency with a total surrender of control. He tells her she needs no one's permission, a direct strike against the chains of coercive control that once defined her existence. Ava's tears are a release, a reaction to the radical concept that she is allowed to have a life of her own. The morning sun replaces the nightmares, signaling a psychological dawn. Downstairs, the sound of Eli's joy is the heartbeat of a home that has finally become a predictable, safe harbor for the innocent. The kitchen becomes a stage for a domestic integration test. Vincent, once the master of a criminal empire, is reduced to a chaotic mess of flour while trying to appease a 6-year-old. This shift from enforcer to inept chef is a beautiful expansion of his humanity, a willingness to be foolish for the sake of love. The kitchen is a disaster of burnt batter, but the sound of Ava's laughter is the real feast. Vincent stands disheveled and white with flour, the cold mask of his past finally crumbling into a genuine smile. It is a visual positive reinforcement, a total departure from the clinical monster he used to be. Ava is struck by an epiphany of home, realizing her safety is anchored in this chosen family, rather than mere legal status. Vincent's humor regarding the charcoal breakfast shows a healthy ego that doesn't need to dominate. A sharp, healing contrast to the narcissists who previously ruled her world. Eli's resilience in the face of the burnt food proves a secure bond is forming with the man he once feared. Vincent's mantra of try again shows a warrior's persistence applied to the quiet life. Ava watches from the wings, savoring the naturalistic beauty of her husband and son, building a world out of mundane failures. A message from the law brings situational finality. Marcus, the architect of their tragedy, has retreated into the ruins of his own accountability. The transition from a life and death struggle to a quiet morning debate over pancakes marks the successful birth of their new normal, where the monsters have finally been laid to rest. Better than good, Ava whispers, her heart finally at peace. Even the lawyers admit that Vincent is one of the good ones, a rare reform of character. This external blessing stabilizes her internal world, reinforcing the truth that her decision to trust the man from the shadows was the right one. Vincent is lost in the moment, prioritizing the boy's laughter over his own dignity. These 3 days at the cabin are a therapeutic sanctuary, a world apart where the blood and the legal threats cannot find them. In this quiet bubble, they are no longer survivors of a tragedy, but a family beginning a long, slow peace. The lures are empty, but the silence between Vincent and Eli is full. Ava watches from the porch, observing their rhythmic sparring over bait like a choreographed dance of reconciliation. The crackling fire later becomes a confessional where small truths are offered like burnt sacrifices to the night. They unspool their histories in the soft glow of the lamp. She learns his love for old cinema. He unearths the sketches she once hid away. Their touch is a slow burn sequence, deliberate and tender, replacing the frantic static of past wounds with a quiet, synchronized heartbeat. The city walls no longer feel like a cage. As steam rises from a simple bowl of spaghetti, the kitchen light softens the edges of their jagged pasts. Dinner talk of ancient bones and history marks the arrival of a beautiful, terrifyingly normal domestic rhythm within their hearth. He praises the meal with the fervor of a devotee, a sweet lie meant to crown her effort. Later, in the study, once a tomb for dark secrets, they rewrite the script for tomorrow. They reclaim the shadows, turning a room of ghosts into a blueprint for their legacy. With a stroke of a pen, he builds a gold-leafed wall around the boy's future. An irrevocable trust stands as a sentinel against fate. He looks at Eli, claiming him not by blood, but by a soul-bound decree. A father born from the ashes of choice and duty. Vincent fights a ghost war against his own lineage. He gifts the child the freedom his own mother never tasted. This fortune is a titanium shield against the world's cruelty, ensuring the boy will never be forced to kneel before a master for the sake of bread. He tears down his empire to build a sanctuary for the broken. A new foundation rises from his wealth, designed to catch those falling from the heights of abuse. It is his penance, a grand architectural apology to the world for the sins he was forced to witness. He hands her the keys to this new kingdom, transforming her scars into armor for others. Her survival becomes a masterclass in resilience, a strategic mission to heal the haunted. He offers her more than a job. He gives her a throne built on the ruins of her pain. His hand finds hers, a silent pact of total autonomy. He leaves the map of her life blank, waiting for her ink. Ava feels the gears shift within. She is no longer a victim fleeing the fire, but a lantern bearer leading others through the same dark woods. She vows to bridge the hollow gaps she once fell through. His smile is a rare sunrise, followed by an embrace. In that warmth, the final shards of her icy defenses melt away, leaving her exposed, yet finally, completely safe. Their Cold War contract has bloomed into a blood-deep bond. But the director shifts the scene. The courtroom beckons. He warns her of the coming storm, where every touch and look will be dissected by cold, professional eyes looking for a crack in their fragile facade. She chooses the light of total honesty. They will present themselves as two shattered souls who found a way to fit their jagged edges together. Their union isn't a lie, but a survivalist masterpiece, a symbiotic stabilization born from the wreckage of two separate lives. Their healing is a fact, not a legal ghost. He whispers his love, tracing it back to her fierce maternal protection. He fell for the wolf guarding her cub, and the moment she finally stopped running and looked him in the eye, she answers his heart, recalling the day he risked everything on the stand. That dangerous grace was her undoing. Now she chooses him every single morning, a daily vow written in the quiet moments before the rest of the world wakes up. 90 days pass in domestic peace. She masters the art of advocacy while he turns grief into bricks. Haven House rises, a monument to the mother he couldn't save, now a sprawling shelter for the souls he finally can. The boy blossoms in the garden of their care, his voice finally finding the word dad without being coached. The court's shadow lingers, but the evaluator sees only light. A home so warm that the official report reads like a testament to a modern miracle. Their enemy is trapped in his own legal web. At the hearing, the judge watches their unified front. The magistrate recalls the ghost she once was, a woman drowning in isolation, now standing tall and radiant beside a man carved from shadows. The court calls their start a gamble. Ava's pulse spikes, a flicker of old terror, but his hand finds hers. That touch is an anchor, steadying her heart even as the judge's gaze lingers on the strange path they took to find home. The boy is thriving, the notes say. Ava has shed her skin. She is no longer a creature of survival. She stands before them as a woman realized, poised and powerful, a phoenix rising from her own ashes. The gavel falls. Custody is hers. The case is a closed book. A massive, invisible weight slides off her shoulders as the lawyer nods. She breathes, really breathes, for the first time in years, the legal machinery finally coming to a halt behind them. Their lawyer marvels at the impossible win. Vincent offers a curt nod. Ava feels the rush of freedom, but it carries a sting. She is finally liberated, yet she finds that total autonomy is its own dizzying kind of vertigo. He speaks of simple things, dinner and routine. They commit to the work of being a family, a daily labor of reinforcing the walls they built. No more grand gestures, just the steady, quiet heartbeat of finally being present. Their bodies meet, a final seal against the world's prying eyes. The courtroom is a memory. They walk into the light, turning from the surveillance and the fear, focusing only on the long, quiet road of healing together. Their future is a house built on the bedrock of trauma. Ava realizes that true salvation often wears the face of a nightmare. She looked into the eyes of a dangerous stranger and found her savior, a tragic irony that she now calls her life. They turned wreckage into a home. 6 weeks of peace pass like a dream. Then a mundane morning is shattered. A knock at the door brings a new variable, a ghost from the world they thought they had finally escaped. While Vincent handles the world, Ava opens the door to Jennifer Chen. The woman is a portrait of ruin. A dark bruise blooms across her cheek like a crushed violet, her eyes hollowed by a fatigue that goes bone deep. Jennifer has fled the monster, Marcus. She stands on the threshold, voice trembling like a dying bird, clutching a single suitcase. She is a woman in flight, her entire existence reduced to the desperate need for a wall that doesn't hit back. There is no petty triumph in Ava's heart, only a deep, aching resonance. She sees her own past staring back at her. Knowing the sheer, terrifying courage it takes to break the chain, she pulls the woman inside, offering the sanctuary she once prayed for. The newcomer is stunned by the grace offered. Ava reminds her of the secret she once shared, the one that kept Eli safe. This home is a debt repaid, a circle closing. One act of protection deserves another in this cold world. Vincent enters, his gaze sharpening into a clinical edge. Ava sums up the tragedy. Marcus, he needs nothing more. He scans the victim, his mind already calculating the moves of a new war to protect their sanctuary. He offers his protection like a king granting asylum. Their home is now an outpost of their foundation. Jennifer collapses into the safety of it, a dam breaking as the subjects begin the delicate work of piecing a broken human being back together. She tells a story as old as time, the slow poison of control, the verbal lash, and the final strike when she dared to stand. She confirms what Ava always knew, the warnings were true. The monster in the suit was exactly what they feared. Ava reflects on the blind eyes of the elite. High-status predators hide in the glare of their own success. She knows the script, the family that looks away, the isolation that turns a home into a private, soundproof hell. The victim is a prisoner, penniless and cut off. Marcus's digital ghosts haunt her phone, a barrage of threats designed to drag her back. She is a woman owned, struggling to find the person she used to be. Vincent notes her careful escape. He moves with the precision of a surgeon, already on the phone with the law. A restraining order is the first brick in the wall he's building. The legal dismantling of Marcus's empire has officially begun. He silences her money fears, calling it a debt he owes. Ava leads the woman to a room prepared for ghosts. Here, behind heavy doors, the long process of remembering how to breathe can finally begin. Jennifer stays in her designated cage of comfort, questioning why they care. Ava looks at her through the lens of a mirror. She chooses the warmth of the tribe over the coldness of old grudges, offering a hand to the woman she once hated. The ghost of Vincent's neglected mother haunts the room. Ava is the safety net he couldn't provide then. She calls this intervention grace, a clinical, beautiful redistribution of the same mercy that once pulled her own soul from the wreckage. Jennifer's 21 days of healing were a blur of sterile safety. While Patricia's legal steel kept Marcus at bay, Vincent wove her into his hidden world, offering a roof and a purpose within his shadowed network. Ava rebuilt the foundations of a life, restoring the woman's stolen agency piece by piece. Young Eli watched from the wings, his eyes absorbing a new curriculum: how the broken are mended and the lost are found. The boy witnessed a strange alchemy, mercy chosen over ease. When Jennifer offered gold for her salvation, Ava gently pushed her hand away, whispering that the debt must be paid forward to the next soul in the storm. Under a cooling sky, Vincent watched the boy claim the new garden, trying to credit Ava's solitary grace. She corrected him with the soft look, defining their victory as a masterpiece painted by two sets of hands. Vincent spoke of ledgers, dismissing his heart as mere overhead. Ava shook her head. She knew their bond was forged in the fire of shared scars, a fusion so total her soul no longer knew where he began. She asked if he rued that first rain-slicked night at the diner. His no was instant and sharp. In this makeshift family, the ghost of a man had finally found a heartbeat beyond the cold commerce of blood. They signed a pact of mutual redemption. 7 months later, Haven House opened, a grand, silent mansion offering 20 beds and a sanctuary for women fleeing the long, dark shadows of their own personal Greek tragedies. The elite gathered in silk, but Ava's voice was the only sound that mattered. She stood at the podium, her fingers grazing the air toward Vincent and Eli, her twin anchors in a world that once tried to drown her. She spoke of the abyss, a mother on the precipice of ruin. As the memories threatened to pull her under, she caught Vincent's eye, drawing strength from his silent, ironclad gaze and the slight nod of his head. She described a shadow that reached out when God wouldn't. That one selfless act had preserved her motherhood and led her into the warmth of a life she once thought was a cruel, impossible fairy tale of safety. Eli's bright smile was the punctuation to her recovery. She declared that Haven House wasn't a prison of memories, but a workshop where the architecture of a future could be built from the wreckage of a past. To ask for help, she said, was the ultimate act of defiance. She looked into the cameras, promising every invisible woman that they were seen, they were valued, and they were no longer alone in the cold dark. Survival had turned into a slow, beautiful blooming. Vincent's hand found hers as the applause swelled. Ava whispered that their mothers, long gone to the earth, would finally see their children doing something truly holy and redemptive. He nodded, his silence a prayer for the dead. Ava had begun reaching back toward her mother in Ohio. The words were awkward and the distance vast, but the first stitches of a broken family were finally being sewn. On the ride home, Eli's voice rose in a desperate plea for a dog. The parents shared a silent, knowing look, the unspoken language of a united front, while the boy promised the world in exchange for a puppy. Vincent's soft, "we'll see," was already a surrender to his son. That night, they sat on the porch in the heavy quiet, breathing in a peace that wasn't borrowed, free from the weight of crisis or old obligations. These moments of stillness were their medicine, but the world intruded when Agent Chen called. The Vulov trial was coming, and Vincent would have to step out of the shadows and into the blinding light of the witness stand. His shoulders tightened at the thought of the spotlight. To destroy the brothers, he would have to offer up his own neck, watching his legitimate empire burn under the weight of his dark history and federal cooperation. He feared the stain of his sins would touch his family. Ava wouldn't hear of it. She took his face in her hands and recast his betrayal of the underworld as a heroic war against the wolves of the world. He whispered of his past crimes, but she saw only his present grace. To her, his life wasn't a ledger of sins, but a masterpiece of reconstruction, a man building a fortress of safety where he once built fear. She promised to stand beside him in the fire of the courtroom. When he questioned his worth, she reminded him that this all began because he chose to save a stranger when he had nothing to gain but trouble. The trial was a storm of flashbulbs. Vincent's words were cold, sharp blades that cut through the Vulov's defense, burying them in prison for decades before the public's fickle interest eventually began to decay and fade away. His name became a synonym for hard-won truth. Eli turned 7 in a house full of laughter, while Haven House took in its first 8 souls. Women beginning the long, slow walk back to the light with professional help. Ava conquered her books and the foundation with equal fire. Meanwhile, the monster Marcus traded his secrets for a soft bed in a cage, eventually creeping back into the world on a short, legal leash under strict probation. Marcus's return was a hollow echo that soon faded. To him, the boy had been a trophy. To the boy, the man was a ghost. Eli didn't even notice the total absence of the man who shared his blood. Vincent wore fatherhood like a second skin, a perfect protector. But one Saturday, a year after the world changed, Ava woke to a cold spot in the bed and a silence that felt heavy with a different kind of secret. Sizzling sounds drifted up from below, the heavy bass of a man's voice mixed with a boy's high pitch. In the kitchen, she found them, a collaborative culinary effort showing marked improvement in their motor skills and heat control. Eli hovered over the plates like a diamond cutter while Vincent flipped the protein. When Ava appeared, the boy hissed for silence. This breakfast was a high-stakes masterpiece, and the queen had arrived far too early. A plate of fruit sat like an offering between them. Vincent, usually so cold and composed, suddenly looked like a boy himself, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his pocket for a small velvet box hidden in his clothes. He spoke of that first night at the diner, stripping away the lies. It began as a cold deal, a way to survive the law, but it had become the only thing in his life that felt like a genuine daily truth. The new ring was a heavy, glittering promise, replacing the thin band of their desperate pact. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was a vow to breathe beside her for the rest of his biological life, heart, and soul. When he asked the question, Ava's strength dissolved into a flood of tears. The brilliant new stones on her hand stood as a monument to the beautiful, complex sanctuary they had built from the ruins of their old lives. As he held her, the last ghost of Marcus Chen vanished. She wasn't a victim anymore, nor a survivor. She was simply a woman who was loved, having finally crossed the threshold into a stabilized, integrated, and whole existence. She took a new name, a final shedding of her old skin. At the wedding, Patricia stood witness while little Eli carried the rings with a pathological seriousness, executing his administrative duties like a small, solemn king. Their chosen family gathered to validate the union. The exchange of vows happened in the soft light of the outdoors, marking their final transition from a strategic survival pact to a bond of authentic, deep emotional cohesion. She promised to be his peace, the quiet harbor from the man who had been her stabilizer. She wasn't looking for a savior. She was promising to be a proactive partner, protecting him as he had always protected her. Vincent's vow was one of iron and honor, not pity. He looked her in the eye, confessing that she had taken a man who knew only himself and taught him how to live for a socially constructive and holy purpose. Vincent looks at the woman who was once a ghost, honoring the madness of their first meeting. The crowd's roar is a final absolution for a love they bled to keep alive. The reception is a carefully staged play of normalcy. Vincent tracks the flicker of joy in Ava's eyes as they drift across the floor while the boy stands tall, practicing the heavy silence of a man. Ava's breath hitches, her chest tight with the sheer impossibility of this piece. She looks at the guests, other survivors, and sees the living proof of the sanctuary they built together. The frame captures a tribe born from the ruins. Salvation here is not a single act, but a slow, agonizing cycle of tiny choices that heal the soul, one heartbeat at a time. Vincent's gaze cuts through the room, resting on the woman who saved him. They stand in the quiet aftermath of their own destruction, looking back at the wreckage of their former selves. Their whispers are the prayers of the drowning. As they sway, their footsteps trace a map through the ruins of who they used to be, two heartbeats finally moving in perfect sync. The community stands as a living monument to their grit. Ava drifts to the window, her private altar, watching the girl she once was finally vanish into the golden light of the garden. He draws her into his shadow, his breath a low vibration against her ear. No more maybe or if. He lays out their future like a blood oath, solid and unbreakable. They build their temple on the philosophy of the now. It's not about being perfect. It's about choosing each other again every time the sun rises over their beautiful, jagged scars. They know the darkness will return to test them. But as the child wrestles with a 3-month-old pup on the floor, Vincent sees a shield forged for the next generation. The boy gives the dog a name, a simple sound of pure joy. Ava watches him, her heart aching at how this impossible life rose from the wreckage of her worst nightmares. "You saw me," she whispers, her voice breaking. She remembers being a shadow in the rain, a nothingness that he reached out and pulled back into the world of the living. He shakes his head, his voice a low rumble of debt. "You were the one who brought me back." He pulls her close, their shadows merging as the music swells. The boy's shout breaks the heavy silence of their pact. They turn together, stepping out of the dim hallway and into the blinding afternoon sun, leaving their ghosts in the dark. One moment of mercy from a stranger shattered the cycle of death. It was a miracle that salvaged 3 souls, a victim, a child, and a man who had forgotten how to be human. He was a hollow shell until her light gave him weight. This redemption is a fever spreading to every broken soul they touch. Ava watches the dog's chaotic joy, seeing the final proof that hope is real. They are a mosaic of broken glass held together by a midnight miracle. It started in the cold, a desperate gamble that proved love can outrun even the darkest fate, overwriting every tragedy they ever knew. She lives because she dared to bet everything on a stranger's hand. Every day is a new script, a stubborn refusal to let their story end in the catastrophic tragedy that the world once promised them. Ava maps out her future at Haven House, a place where she will turn her trauma into a sanctuary. She is the architect now, using her own scars as a blueprint to lead others out of the dark. She knows the truth. 12 hours can rewrite a destiny, and a stranger can become your only world. Desperation is fuel for a new mission. To truly live, the old self must die in a savior's arms. A midnight meeting became a life sentence of devotion. Ava sees that night as a miracle, not a fluke. Now she is trapped in a beautiful loop of saving others, proving her own recovery is permanent. A ghost of a woman, a man with blood on his hands, and a boy the world forgot. Out of that midnight ink, they built a house of light, ensuring the shadows never returned to the door.